The tectonic plates of the NFL landscape are shifting beneath our feet, and the path to fantasy championships, it's evolving. So after combing through all of the data from week 9, there are 5 players that stood out to me more than most. There are 3 rookies just now hitting their stride, absolute blow-up performances, but we also have 2 veteran running backs looking to reassert their dominance in the food chain. Anytime we get a change like this, we have to stop and think through the scenarios. Is this something we think can continue, or is it just a blip on the radar? So for each player, we will talk about their rest of season outlook, but we will also talk about players I would be willing to move on from to get them onto my roster, including some of the most recent trades. Some of you have probably already guessed who I'm going to talk about first. I mentioned the word blow up. I mentioned the word rookie. Who else could it be besides CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans? 470 passing yards and 5 touchdowns in week 9. And while that does help bring up his average, he's sitting at 285 yards per game. We have now seen Stroud hit 275 yards or higher in 4 out of 8 games. He's also thrown multiple touchdowns in 5 out of 8 contests. So yeah, we love the big blow-up games, but the more important thing is we know that we've got a good chance for Stroud to have these 250-plus yard outings and give us a shot at 2 touchdowns in each game. And that makes him a very viable fantasy starter. When we look at the rookie quarterbacks to perform similarly to Stroud based on data back to 2011, we have actually got Andrew Luck, who averaged 19 fantasy points per game. We have got Baker Mayfield. I know, not great, but he did average 18 fantasy points per game. Joe Burrow at 19, and also Justin Herbert at 23. All of those guys, had they played a full season, would have been a top 12 quarterback in those years. And when we expand the data pool and take the label of rookie off, it comes out to quarterback 7 for the comps for CJ Stroud. Now, I don't want to be that aggressive, but I do think when we look at his outlook for the rest of the season, he is a low-end QB1, and we may continue to move him up as we go. He could be one of these elite pocket passing quarterbacks that can get to that mid-range QB1 spot like what we've seen in historical years from a Joe Burrow. So let's talk about 3 quarterbacks where I would actually rather move forward with CJ Stroud than these names. Might be a little surprising, but the first name is Trevor Lawrence. Look, we like Trevor Lawrence. We like the weapons. Maybe he can get it going. But at the end of the day, CJ Stroud's already doing it. He's already doing it. Brock Purdy, this is a run-first offense. Yes, surrounded with great weapons. But are they really going to throw the ball that much? And we've kind of seen a little bit of regression from Purdy over the last 3 games. And then finally, Jared Goff. Jared Goff's playing really well, but this is a run-first offense, and they don't have the explosive down-the-field weapons that can truly unlock that upside like a Tank Dell or a Nico Collins. Very good players in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta. But again, run-first offense and more of a move-the-chains kind of mentality. So give me CJ Stroud over those 3 names. And if you're hurting for quarterback and thinking about targeting CJ Stroud, there are several trades over on fantasycalc.com, but 3 that I saw that have occurred just in the last 2 days, and I would pull the trigger on each one of these. The first 2, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. If I need a quarterback and I want upside for my stretch run, I want a shot at Stroud. This is an offense that just isn't flowing right at this point in Seattle, so they could get going, but I'm willing to move on. Sometimes you have to pay to go get an asset like Stroud. And then finally, Brian Robinson Jr., he's just a volume-dependent, touchdown-dependent back that game scripts can completely wipe out. So that's another name that I would be willing to move on to go get CJ Stroud. And the second player we have to discuss is another rookie, undrafted free agent out of East Carolina. We're talking about Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens. Now look, when we go to the utilization, it's not going to look great for Mitchell. He was only out there for 17% of the snaps and 24% of the team's rushing attempts. So that was 9 on the day. He did finish second behind Justice Hill. He was also tied for the team lead with 4 rushing attempts in the first half. So while the utilization doesn't look good right now, you can't start Mitchell today. But we have to have a little bit of forethought on this one. We have to think ahead. And we also need to look at the Ravens and what have they not had out of the backfield this year? They're not getting a ton of explosive plays. Gus Edwards is there to pound between the tackles. Mitchell had a 21% explosive rush rate, so carries of 10 plus yards or more coming out of college. That was tied for best in this class in 2023, and that was on full display in Week 9 against the Seahawks. He had a carry go off of left guard where Jamal Adams made a slight miscalculation, but because of the speed of Mitchell, that turned into a 40-yard touchdown run. Then he had a toss play to the right. He quickly gets past the edge defenders, that first layer of defense, and again, that acceleration takes away the angles for the linebackers, safeties, and he's on top of the third layer of defenders very, very quickly. That one ended up going for 60 yards, not a score, but I could easily see this becoming a two-way backfield between Gus Edwards, really providing that power aspect, probably keeping most of the work inside the 5-yard line, but Mitchell being more in that Devin Achane type of role, trying to hit the home runs. So when we talk about that rest of season outlook for Mitchell, there is a wide range. Right now, he is a running back 5, but he could give you that running back 2 upside. And I would rather roster him today, even if it meant that I've got to start him in a pinch on a bye week, over names like Ezekiel Elliott, as well as Antonio Gibson. Yeah, those guys might give you 8, 9, 10 points, but Mitchell can do that in one play. So even though we look at him as that running back 5, I would be willing to drop those guys if that's what it takes to get Mitchell onto my team. Well, our third player was in the news heading into Week 9. His coach, Matt LaFleur, told us they were ready to cut him loose, that he was ready to go from that hamstring injury. And oh boy, did they ever. He had a 57% snap share, handled 54% of the rushing attempts, a 52% route participation, and had a 21% target share. He had a total of 25 opportunities, 20 attempts, and 5 targets. I really do think there's a good chance this is going to continue. Number one, it's what we've seen in the 2 previous years with A.J. Dillon getting work. But the other component here is Dillon has not been good. 3.3 yards per carry. He is not adding much when he's on the field. And when we look at what Aaron Jones was able to do in a very similar role to this over the last 2 seasons, 15.1 fantasy points per game, a running back 12, and a running back 10 finish. So when we look at that rest of season outlook for Jones, right now I've upgraded him to high-end running back 2, but he could easily be in that low-end running back 1 conversation very soon. And if you look at some recent trades that have happened, Evan Ingram, there's more upside with Aaron Jones. Evan Ingram's been a good tight end, but more upside with Aaron Jones. Isaiah Pacheco, even though he leads the Chiefs in the run game, he just doesn't get as many opportunities to score touchdowns. Aaron Jones has shown that he can do this. I would rather have Jones. And then finally, Tyler Lockett, who we already discussed earlier, just not clicking. Give me Aaron Jones. That second veteran running back that we have to talk about is Jonathan Taylor from the Colts. He's had a steady upward trend over the last 5 games, but there was a takeover in Week 9 of the Colts backfield. 75% snap share, 62% of the rushing attempts, 75% route participation, and a 23% target share. He also took all of the 2-minute work and 80% of the long down and distance. Now, one caveat that we have to consider here is we have not seen the typical efficiency we're used to from Jonathan Taylor so far this season. 28% of his carries have gone for more yards than expected. That's the 4th worst per Next Gen Stats. And we have the opposite thing happening with Zach Moss, who has had 45% of his carries go for more yards than expected, and that is the 8th best in the NFL. So when you take those efficiency concerns and you bake them into the low-end range of his comp group, it does drag down his comparisons. Running back 13 is the average finish with 15.3 fantasy points per game based on data over the last 12 years. Not quite to that 2021 Jonathan Taylor level when he had 22.2 fantasy points per game. But he has performed well over multiple seasons, so we know he could get back to that range if he keeps this workload. And because of that, I would rather roster him over someone like Tony Pollard, who still has something to prove. Pollard's never shown us in a heavier workload that he can do this, and he's been on the struggle bus lately. And if we also look at players like DeAndre Swift, that's a trade that happened over the last 2 days. I would take JT in both of those scenarios. With our final player, we turn our attention back to the wide receiver position and another rookie. It's Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. Now, Dell didn't start off the season in a full-time role in week 1. He also got knocked out of a game with a concussion. But if we look at the 5 contests where he's had an 80% route participation or better, he is averaging 17.3 fantasy points per game on 7 targets. If we take a look at his comp group over the last 12 years of data, wide receiver 23 with 14.1 fantasy points per game. When I think about that rest of season outlook for Dell, I wanted to go ahead and get him into that low-end wide receiver 2 range. I couldn't quite get him there for 2 reasons. First of all, Robert Woods has been out for the last 2 games. And then secondly, we have Noah Brown, who's returned to that slot role. And that's the guy that kept Tank Dell out of a full-time role in week 1. I think Dell will still see the field plenty, but it could be a little bit more of a rotation. So I want to see what happens there. However, when we think about our roster construction, I still want to be aggressive with Dell. He is still rostered less than Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton in some leagues. That just shouldn't be true. You definitely want Dell over those guys. And also, this one I'm sad to say, but Christian Watson. Now, there are a few trades that have also recently happened, and I would take all of these. We've got Jacoby Myers. I'm not sure about this passing situation anymore with the Raiders. Give me CJ Stroud over Aiden O'Connell. And then we have DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah, Will Levis has been named the starter, so I like Hopkins, but if I had to choose, I would still take Tank Dell. And then finally, George Pickens, who only sees a 16% target share when Deontay Johnson is on the field. I would rather have Tank than all 3 of those wide receivers.